We've covered bodhicitta, which is the principal path of the Mahayana, for many sessions by now. And having given rise to this thought to achieve full enlightenment, now we must engage in the deeds, because it is not enough to merely give rise to bodhicitta in order to achieve enlightenment. To achieve enlightenment, one must engage in the six perfections, the four means of gathering disciples, and by extension, the 10 perfections on top of the six. So why do we wish to achieve full enlightenment? It's for the sake of all mother sentient beings, as extensive as space. So that should be our motivation. So with respect to training in the deeds, we started with the first perfection of generosity. And before we move on to ethics, we have a little bit left to go over for generosity. So we need to make some distinctions when we talk about generosity. So we can refer to generosity in different ways in this context of practicing the deeds. So there's the practice of generosity, the perfection of generosity, and the practice of the perfection of generosity. So it's easier to explain these by giving examples of which types of beings have these. So if we start with the perfection of generosity, this is something that exists only in the continuum of a Buddha, right? Because you've taken it to the far shore, and that far shore is Buddhahood, right? The perfection of generosity only exists with Buddhas. Then, if we think of the practice of the perfection of generosity, that is not something that hearers or solitary realizers have, because the practice of the perfection of generosity is qualified by a motivation to engage in that deed in order to achieve enlightenment for the sake of all mother sentient beings. And because they lack that motivation, they lack the practice of the perfection. Can they have a practice of generosity? Yes, of course, they can engage in a mere practice of generosity, but not a practice of the perfection of generosity. And of course, nor do they have the perfection of generosity itself. If you take, for example, a bodhisattva trainee, even if they are to engage in the practice of giving away their own body, that is still a practice of the perfection of generosity and not the perfection of generosity. So having said that, there are still some treatises that assert that the perfection of generosity exists during the time one is training in generosity. And they will make such a distinction as a Buddha has the perfection of generosity, but not the training or practice of the perfection of generosity, because a Buddha's act of generosity does not rely on any sort of motivation to come about. It comes about naturally, right? So, I mean, different texts make different distinctions, and those are the main assertions. If we turn back to Tsongkhapa's Song of Spiritual Experience, we are up to verse number 23 with respect to generosity. It reads, "Generosity is the wish-granting jewel that satisfies the wishes of beings. It's the best weapon to cut the knots of miserliness. It's a deed of the Bodhisattva, dauntless and giving birth to courage, and is the basis to proclaim renown throughout the 10 directions." So Tsongkhapa likens generosity to a wish-granting jewel, because a wish-granting jewel is that which fulfills all your wishes, right? It gives you whatever you want. So if you are to give rise to generosity, which is a pure mind of giving unstained by miserliness, you can fulfill other beings' wishes by granting them whatever they want. And Tsongkhapa says that it's the best weapon to cut the knots of miserliness. So miserliness is what makes it difficult for us to give things away, right? Because of miserliness, we really have to think about it before we give something. And due to that attachment, we can't just give freely. So if we give rise to a pure mind of giving, then that cuts that knot of miserliness. Tsongkhapa says it's a deed of the bodhisattva dauntless and giving birth to courage. So not only do we need to give rise to generosity, this is indicating that we also need to give rise to courage and dauntlessness. So an attitude in which we don't feel despondent when we engage in such a deed. So if we're able to combine our mind of giving with courage and so forth and give rise to that, then we are able to give away our body, our possessions, our roots of virtue to sentient beings, right? Such courage becomes the foundation for bodhisattva deeds. So understanding such benefits that arise from generosity, right? Cutting the knots of miserliness, giving rise to courage and dauntlessness. It can inspire us to engage in these noble paths towards Buddhahood. Shantideva says in verse 87 of chapter 5 on introspection that those whose compassionate thoughts are not yet pure should not give up their bodies, but let them be surrendered when, both now and in their future lives, great benefit is thereby gained. So this is an important point. In Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stages of the path, he also emphasizes the importance of compassion and great love when training in generosity. If you don't have great compassion and great love, you cannot engage in such deeds as giving away your body, for example. It's not possible, and nor should you, as Shantideva says. So our giving should be motivated by attitudes of compassion. For example, when you see destitute beings, through compassion towards them, it should motivate you to give something to them. If we look at the example of the Buddha's previous lives when he was a bodhisattva trainee, a situation arose where a mother tigress gave birth to 7 cubs, and she was unable to feed them because she was starving. So the Buddha, out of his great compassion for her situation, gave his own body in order to feed her so she could feed her cubs. So Shantideva says, but let them be surrendered both now and in future lives when great benefit is thereby gained. So give up your body now and in future lives when great benefit is to be gained. So this indicates that if we are to get to a point where we can give away our body, then it does achieve the great benefit of others. I apologize because I'm not particularly, I'm speaking as myself as the translator. I'm not particularly informed of all the different accounts of when the Buddha gave his body away to the tigress. So Geshe-la said there are 3 different presentations of this account with respect to who exactly the Bodhisattva was that gave their body to the tigress, who the tigress was in a previous life, and who the cubs were. And not only that, the place in which it happened. So Geshe-la just presented a whole string of facts about each of these, which I didn't grasp because I'm not familiar with the topic, but I picked up on the last one, which is the account where it takes place in Nepal. And the 7 cubs of the tiger were said to be the 5 disciples of the Buddha. who came to him after he achieved enlightenment. And to make the number 7, it includes Shariputra and Maudgalyayana on top of that. So with respect to the other accounts, I didn't really pick up the facts. I'm sorry. So because the account appears in 3 different sutras, which give different presentations on what happened. For example, in one of the sutras, it says there were 2 cubs. In another, it says there were 5 cubs. In another, there were 7 cubs. It's, in my opinion, most likely the case that these were all separate events that happened in different lives when the Buddha was a bodhisattva trainee. Compassion is the root of the Mahayana path. Without compassion, there is no bodhicitta. So, considering its importance and the importance of us practicing compassion, as today is also His Holiness's birthday, and we've all received the Avalokiteshvara empowerments from His Holiness, I'd like to take some time to meditate on compassion through visualizing the merit field. So we've all received the empowerments, the transmissions, and the instructions with respect to the deity Avalokiteshvara. Avalokiteshvara is said to be the embodiment of compassion, Manjushri, the embodiment of wisdom, and Tara, the embodiment of action. And these beings enlightened into these aspects because of the prayers they made while they were trainees. So Avalokiteshvara being the embodiment of compassion, we're now going to meditate on compassion. And with respect to meditating on compassion, of course, there are different ways you can go about it. You can skip the visualization of the field of merit entirely, or you can visualize the field of merit. And while doing so, utilize a practice that is uniting sutra and tantra, wherein you visualize nectar descending from the guru and so forth. So Arya Avalokiteshvara was present during the time of the Buddha. And in the sutras, he's depicted as someone in human form and also a fully ordained monk. There are different types or aspects of Avalokiteshvara, having 1,000 arms, 4 arms, and so forth. But how he appeared to the common disciple was as a human being, just like His Holiness the Dalai Lama now appears to us as a human being. So we're going to meditate on compassion, utilizing the visualization of the merit field. And as the translator explains this to you, please start to visualize it. So at the height of your eyebrows, just in front a little bit, is in nature your most kind root guru, in aspect Shakyamuni Buddha. To his right are the bodhisattvas of the lineage of instructions of bodhicitta, including Maitreya and Asanga, and the masters of the lineage of the 7-fold cause and effect instructions. And on Buddha Shakyamuni's left are the lineage lamas of the instructions of equalizing and exchanging oneself with others. So Manjushri, Nagarjuna, and Shantideva. From Buddha Shakyamuni's heart appear light rays radiating out. And from those light rays arise Avalokiteshvara, having 1,000 arms or 4 arms, whichever is preferable to you. You can visualize him merely in front, or you can visualize him at the heart of Buddha Shakyamuni. Visualize him as white in color, like the color of the moon. He is very white in color and he is radiant. His eyes are open. So his white color and radiance symbolizes at all time his radiating compassion and love towards all sentient beings. His eyes being open and looking down symbolizes that he is the embodiment of compassion that observes the suffering of sentient beings and wishes to free them from it. From our side, we should have faith that this Avalokiteshvara has the ability to free beings from the lower realms from their suffering through his deeds motivated by great compassion. And from our side, we should also wish to give rise to great compassion equal to that. In order for us to give rise to this great compassion, we must first observe all sentient beings and then develop love for them. So even if you can't imagine all sentient beings, right now imagine the most destitute among them, the suffering ones. Visualize this destitute sentient being or beings in front of you and think, they are not so different from myself. They wish to have happiness, but they can't find it. They wish to be free from their suffering, but they can't be so. So meditate on their situation until feelings arise, right? From the depths of your heart, think, may this being be free from suffering. May I free them from their suffering. And contemplate their situation and this thought again and again until you start to feel something. Observing the sentient being tormented by suffering. Think again and again, may they be free from their causes of suffering that they have accumulated since beginning this time. So while meditating, visualize that from Avalokiteshvara's heart comes in aspect nectar, but in nature his body, speech, and mind. And this nectar descends into the bodies and minds of all sentient beings, including yourself. Visualize that through this process of it absorbing and entering into the bodies and minds of all sentient beings, that the negative deeds accumulated since beginningless time, as well as all obstacles, disappear and leave. And then visualize light radiating out from Avalokiteshvara's heart. This light absorbs into us and blesses us so that we generate the special realization of great compassion and think, I have generated great compassion. So this meditation instruction is good to practice now, right? This visualization of the descending of nectar and light rays from the Guru, so that later when you go into retreat, it's much easier to practice. The listening, contemplation, and meditation taught within the heaps of Dharma of the Buddha. And among those, meditation in particular are not easy practices, right? Meditation is something that must be cultivated for a long, long time, right? Through meditation, we are changing our body, speech, and mind. And this is not easy. And therefore, it's not easy to give rise to thoughts like compassion or bodhicitta. If it was so easy, we would all be enlightened by now. If you think about it, even in this life, there's no end to worldly endeavors, like worldly work. And it's the same for developing attitudes like compassion. They have to be worked at continuously. And then through working at them continuously over time, these coarse minds start to be pacified. And then when coarse minds are pacified, then we can direct our mind as we wish because we have stopped this discursive thinking that prevents us from doing so. So I think really when it comes down to it, this elimination of all these discursive thoughts is true happiness. We should bring meditations on love and compassion into our life. If you think about just meditating on love or compassion for one day, how beneficial it would be. Right now, as we move through life, we interact with others such that we are poorly motivated, they are poorly motivated. We treat them harshly, they treat us harshly. We get upset, they get upset. But if instead of this, we could spend time for even just one day meditating on love and compassion, we can start to reason with ourselves that, it doesn't matter if this other person is mean to me. It doesn't affect my life, right? They don't take from my possessions. They don't take from my wealth. They're not really doing anything. These poor people who are acting out in this way, right? And through generating kinder thoughts towards them, we start to reduce all of these negative discursive thoughts that are always running through our head. As you go about your day, think about it. It happens that we get upset or a bit sad during the day. And during those times, does it help to eat good food? Does that cheer us up? Or people giving us money, does that entirely change our mood? Or is it that through meditating on love and compassion, we can turn our sadness into happiness? Now we must think that having given rise to bodhicitta, I must train in the practices of generosity. So, is it enough to engage in the practice of generosity by thinking, I'm going to give away my body, possessions, and virtues for the sake of achieving Buddhahood for all sentient beings? No, even that is not enough. It must still be further qualified by the non-observation of the three spheres, as it's called. So what this means is that the giver, the object you give, and the recipient should not be seen as inherently existent. They must be viewed as mere imputations, not existing at all from their own side. So if you're able to engage in the practice of generosity in this way, it becomes the supreme practice of generosity of the Mahayana.
Mm.
Geshe-la just quoted a verse with respect to generosity from Chandrakirti's Entering the Middle Way. And I was just checking if it's in Tsongkhapa's Great Treatise on the Stages of the Path, but I don't find it right now. But anyway, it pertains to generosity. And essentially what Chandrakirti is saying is that the practice of the perfection of generosity, does it become a practice of the perfection of generosity? If it is not qualified by both and only one, then it becomes only a practice of generosity and not a practice of the perfection of generosity. Yeah, I'm back. So generosity can also be divided into worldly generosity and transcendental generosity, or um, yeah. So transcendental generosity is essentially generosity that is performed on the grounds. So from the first ground to the 10th ground. So while you're on the grounds, you can give away your body, possessions, roots of virtue without any difficulty at all, without any suffering. Worldly generosity, however, is generosity that you perform while on the path of accumulation or the path of preparation, or while you're not on a path at all. What are the advantages and benefits from practicing giving? Well, if your giving is qualified by an attitude to achieve enlightenment, then it becomes a cause for achieving enlightenment. And likewise, in your future lives, you will not be bereft of things that you need, right? All the possessions you could want, such that you are also able to make great offerings to the three jewels because you are not bereft of possessions. The opposite or antithesis of generosity is miserliness. So it's very important to try and reduce this when you engage in giving. No matter what you're giving, offering to the Sangha and so on and so forth, you should do it without miserliness. We've completed covering the practice of the perfection of generosity. So now we're moving on to the practice of the perfection of ethics. Ethical discipline is incredibly important. If you think how you achieved your precious human rebirth in this life, it was due to you guarding ethical discipline in your previous lifetimes, right? Without guarding ethical discipline, it seems to be very difficult that someone could attain a higher rebirth. As it is said, the causes for high status are rooted in discipline.
Mm.
In Tibetan, it's called Sutim, but in Sanskrit, it is Shila. So the Tibetan, well, modern Tibetan commentary interprets the Sanskrit word Shila as Shi meaning a coolness, right? A cooling, and La being having attained that. So, for example, if you are burned by fire and you apply something that is cooling to that burn, you achieve a sort of mental peace due to that. And likewise, if you refrain from engaging in the wrong deeds of the 10 non-virtues, then you definitely do achieve peace and happiness, independence on that. So now we're going to look at the nature or definition of ethical discipline and its divisions. So if we look at the definition of ethical discipline, well, ethical discipline, first of all, is a consciousness. It's a mental factor, right? It's not the physical act. It's a mental factor. And as it says in Sutra, ethical discipline is the abandonment of a mind of harm, right? The abandonment of violence. For example, Tsongkhapa in his great treatise on the stages of the path says discipline is the abandonment of that which harms others together with its basis. So that which harms others or the harming of others are out of the 10 non-virtues, the 3 of body and 4 of speech. And their bases are the 3 non-virtues related to mind. So abandoning all of these, the antithesis of discipline is the practice of discipline. So if we go according to Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stages of the path, there are many divisions of discipline, but in brief, it's summarized as 3. The ethical discipline of restraint, the ethical discipline of gathering virtue, and the ethical discipline of acting for the welfare of living beings. So the first, the ethical discipline of restraint, can be broadly summarized to be the discipline of the Pratimoksha vows, the Bodhisattva vows, and the Tantric vows. So what are the Pratimoksha vows? Well, there are some different divisions of those. Sometimes they're categorized as 8 types, sometimes as 7 types, but mainly they are vows that are with regard to physical and verbal actions, right? Restraining one's physical and verbal actions. So physically, to refrain from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, and to refrain from the non-virtues of speech, lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, and idle speech. So these vows, for example, with respect to monks and nuns, are taken for a lifetime. If you look at Bodhisattva vows, they are a mental commitment that you can retake every day, right? There's no limit to how many times you can take Bodhisattva vows. And likewise with the Tantra vows, they're also a mental commitment that you can retake day to day. Like when you do this, what is it, the self-generation practices and so forth. The self-initiation practice, sorry, yeah. Ethical discipline means to guard. It's difficult to translate, but it's essentially it's to guard in accordance with what is right. So for example, as a worldly example, if you are a thief and you steal things, you go to jail because you have gone against what the world perceives as right action. Likewise, the ethical discipline that we engage in is good conduct of body and mind. And this good conduct of body and mind leads to easy generation of minds such as meditative stabilization, right? It leads to easy generation of virtue. If you don't guard ethical discipline, it blocks you from accumulating virtue. So our physical and verbal acts depend on our mind. If our mind is disturbed or not well motivated, then our body and our speech follows that. We fight with others and so on and so forth. So to guard ethical discipline requires that we guard our mind, first of all. Our body and speech is the slave of our mind, right? If our mind wants to fight someone, then our body has to do so, or our speech has to do so. If mentally we think that we want to be mean to someone, then physically or verbally it happens, right? So primarily, therefore, we need to guard our mind, right? If thoughts arise of harming another or being mean to another, we need to apply vigilant introspection at that time and think, these thoughts are arising due to afflictions such as attachment or hatred, and really understand what's going on in our mind so that we can stop these thoughts so that they don't transfer into physical or verbal action. So the main topics that I wanted to cover today were great compassion and to meditate on great compassion, and we got to do that. And then likewise to finish the discussion of the practice of the perfection of generosity. So that discussion was about how the amount that you give is not important, but the motivation behind it. And principally, what we need to remember is that the motivation when giving should be one that is purified of miserliness, first and foremost. So one thing left that I wanted to say, since today is the birthday of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, here at the Dharma Center, we will be performing pujas, and this is great because this is what we also do at Gandhi Shatsi Monastery in India. We perform pujas on the birthday of His Holiness. So His Holiness has sent out a message that his operation has gone well in America for his knees. So that's something we can be happy about. And since we are all connected to His Holiness, whoever is connected to this Dharma Center is connected to His Holiness. Therefore, it's important that you use that connection that you have to make prayers for His Holiness, for his health, long life, and that his activities may flourish.